So today I will continue talking about intangibles, but today I will mainly focus on innovations. And actually this paper is nowadays in the process of the paper that I have presented yesterday was already published. This is not. And it is estimated at the moment on the data set of Russian companies, but we would like actually to run the comparative study because our data sets are compatible, so we can do that on both data sets. So today I will talk about the change in company strategic behavior, and so that paper follows up the theoretical one that we have published 2 years ago. It is about the conditions under which company decided to change their strategy. So we're not focusing on the efficiency of particular strategy, but we will try to understand if it's reasonable to change it, especially under certain conditions. And here we are going to talk about crisis again. So the intuition behind our study is as follows, that we can observe on the market different behavior. So even in the same sector, with the same time of activities, we can see that companies have different strategies. Some companies introduce innovations, and so we can observe these innovations through new products, through just R&D projects that they have. Some of them are successful, some not. But other just follows innovative leaders. And now we cannot actually say that which of this strategy is more beneficial, because sometimes you can have like additional value of introducing something new on the market, but at the same time you take very significant risk. But someone who is following, probably they have less return but less risk. So that's why there is like a trade-off between these two things, like in finance, like in economics, everywhere. So also what we can observe, that there are a lot of anecdotal evidence that really under turbulent conditions, not stable, but under turbulent, companies switch to new strategies more often. And so they just take advantage of being to an opportunity to reshape markets, and that's why they try to introduce either something new or to change, to think about the strategic behavior under these conditions. So there were, of course, some previous studies, so I will just introduce 3 of them. Actually, we have based on that. So there was a study introduced in 2011. What is important here is not the paper, it is actually a report on in frame of European project. That's why it was introduced just after the crisis, and that was very interesting because usually when it comes to publishing papers, it takes more time. Here it was just introduced on very fresh date and very soon. And so they have said that R&D in crisis, on average, is not a good idea. So the risk that companies that introduce innovation, especially if they do that first time, is so they are withdrawn with the first mover advantage, like can be when it's not when they would do that not in crisis. Then this paper was followed up with the paper published in Research Policy by Daniel Archibucci. I don't know actually. Yes, it's because it's Italian name and I never know how to pronounce it. So actually he's publishing every year at least 2 papers about innovation. He's a very, very interesting scholar, and the way he's introducing his findings. So that was a kind of response to this European project, and he said actually that the data that they used were not so good, and so he has more rigorous estimation, and actually he was trying to observe the behavior of the companies before they introduce innovation, and which consequences they have just in the process of this innovation behavior. And so you see here that there are so he has separated different kinds of innovations. He said that they cannot be just covered by one umbrella topic innovation, that there are disruptive innovation, there are also some innovation that don't change markets so dramatically. And no, it's not now the recent paper, but the paper that really, I guess, is interesting, but it's focused on just one sector, agri-food sector. What is important there that recently they have introduced really a lot of disruptive innovation. So that is a very traditional industry, but at the same time is changing very much recently. And that's why it was very interesting to understand how this industry was affected by the crisis. And really they have found that crisis was very good conditions to introduce new products and new way to produce this product in 2008 and 2009. So these companies really appeared first time with the big names after the crisis. So we have followed out these papers, but as you know that our data set is not focused on any particular sector, on any particular market, so we have just analyzed all sectors and all industries in Russia. So, as I said, we have first published a paper which was theoretical paper. It was based on dynamic optimization model, and we have found that there is certain conditions under which company should switch if they have opportunity, of course, to do that. But in general, what we have found that status quo is more likely to be like reasonable choice, and companies don't have enough financial resources. So the main idea is that if you don't have enough resources to switch, so you have to keep your previous strategy. So very insignificant increment in intangible assets that will not bring significant return to cover all the risk. So I have already said that, and also there is, of course, optimal level of switching. So in this paper, we are not talking about optimal. We have actually, now we are working on the next paper when we are trying to switch this optimal level. But here we're just trying to see the average values. So on the next step, this, as I said, is interesting to learn how this theoretical. So we try to estimate that empirically. But we are not talking here about all intangibles, just very particular way to innovate. So we try to reveal first switching, because it is not really a very easy task, because usually companies, they don't manifest that now we are switching to the new strategy. So we can just look for some markers, and we have to understand if this marker really the process of changing the strategy. And when it comes to innovation, maybe it is one of the good examples to do that. Also, we would like to learn about drivers of this switching and consequences of it. So our research question is as follows: do companies switch to innovation when performance of the status quo strategy is significantly high? So our idea is that the main driver of switching to a new strategy is when companies are not satisfied with the current status, with the current strategy. If everything is fine and they already outperform their rivals, probably it's not reasonable to take additional risk. That's why we try to do that. And actually that was also discussed in the literature. So the second time is, do companies switch in environment when they really can get additional benefits and with lower risk? So it means that they try to do that either when they observe stable market or even growing market, but not crisis or recession. And the last question is switching to innovative strategy reasonable in crisis, as I said. And that we measure with the consequences. So we look for those companies that have changed their strategy during crisis years, and then we observe the results after. So on the first stage of our analysis, as I said, we have to identify companies that have changed their strategy, and that is not so easy to do. That's why we have propose the following rule. So if companies introduced R&D, but this R&D is successful, so it means that after some years they have to be followed by the increase in intangible assets. Because innovation, technological innovation, if they are, so they usually have to be resulted in patents or anything that they can capitalize. So increase the intangible assets, that is like, so in theory says. Not just theory, but practice also. On the second stage, we find out factors that drive companies to switch. So we try to estimate the probability of switching under certain conditions. And we focus on two main factors. We're controlling for everything that might be relevant, but we try to compare factors related to previous performance before they have decided to switch and the economic condition in which they have switched. And the third stage, we look for their consequences. So we try to see whether corporate performance after switching were higher with the benchmark to the level that they might have. So that is the design, our econometric strategy. So first we have to identify switching, as I said, and we have analyzed different thresholds. So it's 25% increase, 50% increase, 75%, and double increase in intangible assets. So, of course, we are controlling, so that is in real values, so we don't, we exclude all other factors, but those related to the new intangible assets that appear. And as I said, that is an algorithm. If company invested in R&D in 1 or 2 years before, so, sorry, not or, but 2 years. So we are looking only for those companies that have invested into roughly for 2 years. Then we have estimated the probability, as I said, and estimated the moderation effect of switching under different conditions. So here you see that we actually are looking for this effect and this effect. So that is just switching in any period, and that is switching in crisis. So our data set is, so yesterday I have already presented it. It is 1,000 listed Russian companies. I put emphasis on the data setting that we have, because only 150 companies among them are traded. So it means that the majority of companies that are listed on the Russian stock exchange, they are not delisted, because we still don't have the procedure of delisting, at least it's not used, but they really are not traded. So it means that this is like more or less normal representatives of Russian economy. Actually, the distribution across industries is more or less the same. And it was like a fashion. It was the I think from 2000 to 2005, that a lot of Russian companies went public without understanding for what they are doing that. So, but now they have to disclose a lot of information, unless they are not delisted. Why I put the emphasis on that? Because R&D can be just voluntary disclosure. So we don't have any mandatory disclosure of R&D expenditures. And actually, when we have looked on our data set, just 10% of companies at any year that we have analyzed have disclosed about their R&D. And of course, that is not enough. We understand that there are more companies that introduced R&D expenditures. So we had to look more precisely on all the reports, but also, so I'm not going to go in details, but we had to analyze a lot of buy reports that actually are not mandatory, that are mandatory, but we can conclude how much innovations company have presented that are not disclosed voluntary. So we observed them from 2004 to 2014, and here are some variables that we have to collect, to clean in order to run this study. So, and here are our first results. As you remember, we have 5 thresholds in which we say that companies have to switch. I would say that this one, which is the major part of the share of switching, actually is not switching. It's just to see that, so here is any increase in intangible assets. And what is important that here we have very dramatical increase in changes in intangible assets that were connected with the previous R&D expenditures. So of course we had to look to any institutional change that might happen in this year, why companies, so many companies have introduced first-time innovation exactly in 2011. But actually we didn't find anything. The only thing that we have found is that, so let's say that Russian authorities started to talk about innovations much more than it was in previous years. So it was a policy of modernization that was first time introduced. So it was not, I would say, direct support, governmental support. There were no additional programs that were introduced, but at least authorities have paid more attention on this behavior. But so of course we have to control, and we have control for these changes because of course it seems to be a little bit endogenous. So here is the first model estimation. Also what we have done, so we have compared again. So we have run pre-test analysis, and we have seen that those companies that were, let's say, innovative before switching and innovative during switching, they don't have any significant difference in their performance. And also there is no, there is even distribution across industries, and it means that they are more or less the same. So we can say that best companies, they have higher probability to switch to innovative strategy. I would say that there are a lot of very good companies with good performance that actually didn't introduce innovation. So, and here you see that the only factor that seems to be significant for switching to innovative strategy is crisis. So companies don't rely, don't decide when they decide to switch to strategy, to an innovative strategy, on their performance or on other factors which are like more plausible factors that might them drive to this new strategy, but just on crisis. So in crisis we see that there are significantly less companies. So at least if we talk about marginal effects, it was about from 12 to 15% of companies that switched during this time. But that is not so important for us. What was really important is to understand what was, how this switching to innovative strategy moderated the process of transformation of intangible assets that companies accumulated to their performance. For that we have used 2 indicators, economic value added and operational profit. And we have got consistent results. So really companies, they benefit of being intangible intensive, but at the same time what we could see that with the lower level of switching, it means with more moderate innovative strategy, companies have positive effect, then they have negative effect, negative effect if they switch, like when they increase the intangible assets very much significantly. So the same we have observed for another indicator, another performance indicator is operational profit. And what we have decided to do is to convert switching variable into continuous variable, because here we just introduce it as a dummy variable. And what we have found, so our guess was that it has to be like a non-linear relationship. So what we have found that really this nonlinear relationship U-shape was confirmed. But also, of course, we have to understand if it's just technical result or really it means something, and we have found this threshold, and threshold is very close to the middle, like 40%. It means that really under certain level of innovation intensivity, switching to innovative strategy is not plausible and it's not reasonable. So companies had to either to invest in quite low amount of money in R&D or quite significant money of R&D. So we have, So here are the same estimation but in crisis. So it means that we try to understand if for the subsample that they have that just switched to innovative strategy compared to the sample that switched just during these two crises here in 2008 and 2009, the result might be different. And we have seen that there is a slight shift. So for those companies that have switched during the crisis. And again, we have analyzed these companies before we have estimated so our guess could be that companies that decide to switch during the crisis, they have higher results, higher performance, but we didn't find that. So it means that if companies decide to switch in crisis, they have to invest even more compared to those companies that invest it any other year. So our main conclusion that external shocks influence more company decision to change their strategic behavior compared to the internal factors. That internal factors just have to provide them with sufficient amount of resources that have to be invested into innovation. And that is coherent with the theoretical finding that we had with other studies. There is a minimum required level of investments to innovation, and in crisis, this innovation, the amount of money that company put in R&D has to be even more. So that is, okay, then I'm open for questions.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation. But again, let me ask a very strange question. Why do we care? And I think this is, again, a bureaucratic problem. It's typical, I think, of projects promoted by, say, the European Union or the OECD, because the implication is that more innovation is better. But in fact, there's no evidence of that directly, because, for example, different countries at different stages of development or depending upon their institutions, perhaps you talk as if I understand it correctly, the Angel Gabriel story here is, if we had perfect data and we had perfect information, we would know the exact, precise functional form conditions under which firms in Russia switch to innovative strategies under crises. And implicitly, the argument is, if we knew better what those things are, we could induce them to switch faster to innovative strategies. But you have assumed that, you have not proved that. Maybe the optimal strategy for Russia is for Russia to copy everything and have no innovations. Or maybe the optimal strategy is to open up more industries and to destroy some industries that are innovative but not productive, and increase certain industries that are not very innovative but more productive. You understand? So that I think you're assuming the answer here, and that bothers me. That's one. The second comment I have is that if you look at the innovation literature, the reason it is very difficult, and that's why I'm skeptical of this entire literature, so it's not a direct criticism of you, it's a criticism of the whole literature, is the following. As a rule of thumb, if there were no innovation, we shouldn't care what firms do, because it's all about the market. In other words, firms decide to maximize profit and loss, and the efficient comes when firms are more profit maximizing, okay? Why is innovation interesting to us? Innovation is interesting to us because some innovations, in the Paul Romer sense, have very high positive spillovers, but very low private return. So for those innovations, the more innovative you are, the stupider you are, in some sense. Because, so for example, if you ask like Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, we don't admire them because they did something that's efficient. We admire them that they did something that's ex-ante inefficient. That is ex-ante, before creating Microsoft or Apple. The expected value of this investment has to be either small or negative relative to the benefits to society as a whole. Because if they can capture all the rents, then the market will provide all we need. So the paradox is that multiple firms that are trying to be Facebook or Apple, when you add up all the rents they entered, it is less than all the gains to the winners. The reason it's good is that the gains to society are much bigger than the gains to the rich firms that win, to the Microsofts. I actually have a paper on this in one of my first papers called Lucky Fools. And so this is a problem, you see, because if that's the issue, understanding why a rational firm would or will not invest doesn't tell you anything about what's an optimal innovation strategy for a country. Because the optimal innovation strategy is not innovation per se, it's innovation with large positive spillovers. And I guess that's what I'm sort of saying. You just assume, I'm questioning the inherent assumption that more innovative firms are inherently good. And that's not true.
So maybe that was, I have emphasized that during my talk, but really we didn't imply any assumption about whether innovations are good or bad. So actually, as I have started, our motivation was to look at the behavioral, maybe, so it's not behavior of individuals, but it's behavior of companies, and we were trying to understand if it's rational or not rational. Because, so, I mean, rational in sense that they are switching because they really are not satisfied with the current strategy. So by definition, strategic behavior has to be quite stable. So companies don't have to jump from one strategic behavior to another strategic behavior. But at the same time, we see that sometimes, especially under crisis conditions, companies do that. They do that because they expected something, they expected probably the reshaping of the market, as I said. And innovation is a very good way to just to analyze that, because it is the way to really to change market share and to change like force balance on the market. At least that is in beliefs of the companies, and when we look on the results of surveys, and that was actually one of the paper that was done in frame of this European project, so that is a common belief of companies. It's not Russian companies, but I guess that is followed by any other markets, that they think that innovation is a way to increase significantly market share and to change this balance.
But then, Elena, let me ask you, let's say you got a slightly different result. What does it matter to our understanding for economics or management if they had switched more or switched less? In other words, what do we learn from this? This is what I don't understand. What can we do with this?
So what we do learn that there is, so really we see that on average, those companies that they have changed their strategy, they didn't have, at least during this year, significant increase in the performance. Only those companies that were that they followed quite moderate strategy, or they really introduced very radical increase, they have gained something. So that means that, the contribution, so I understand that maybe is, so I have to think about this argumentation, what we do learn from that, but I think that is interesting, at least for, maybe not for policy, but for explanation why some even formally successful innovation shouldn't be introduced, shouldn't be considered as a really attractive way to reshape your strategy. So you really have to understand whether this strategic behavior, so you can afford this new strategic behavior when you don't have enough resources and enough risk protection. Because here, I mean, to double your intangible assets, I mean, it's not just double your intangible assets, it means that the share of intangible assets in the portfolio is significantly different, and the company looks absolutely different. Unfortunately, we cannot look at Russian market, so we would like to do that on European data. How do investors react to that? Because for listed companies it's very important. On Russian market, unfortunately, this will be not really sustainable. But I think that if you compare also that with the future and long-term sustainability of the company related to the investment perception, that might have more contribution.
Thank you, Elena. It was very interesting for me, and I would like to find out what indicators do you use to find out if the company use innovation strategy or not innovation strategy. And one more question: if company said that it used innovation strategy in marketing, for example, is it more significant or less significant if they said that they use technological innovations, for example? Is it value or is they in the same level?
No, so here we have based on technological innovations. We understand that now, so we can do just that, and we have used two indicators in intangible assets: the increase of intangible assets associated with the R&D expenditure that were conducted during, so the R&D projects that were conducted at least for 2 years before this increase of intangible assets. That was our indicator. Okay, so I will try to talk about the new paper. One more paper is absolutely different. The audience. Let's imagine that Brazil is a part of Europe. no, so that was a joke. So actually, I will explain why we focus on Brazil. It's not because we like Brazilian football more than European football, but really we will show you that I will show you that it's very unique case, not maybe unique, but very good example of how traditional championships are supported by the state. At the same time, this championship don't bring at least apparent efficiency to the market. So that was our paper. We were studying the behavior of football fans, and we were trying to reveal so we were testing very traditional hypotheses in this sphere. It's about demand for tickets and uncertainty of outcomes, because so we presume, and not just we, but all the scholars presume that fans would like to see matches with high uncertainty. So it means that they have to see how everything is going on, just to be the first, to see the first outcome that nobody could predict. So, as I said, we have focused on this literature, and we have studied about the uncertainty of sport outcomes. But what is important that we also would like to introduce the entertainment and the brand perception behavioral issues that are also important, at least for this type of championship. So we have introduced new term. Actually, it was discussed in the literature, but in different way. It's like big team, branded team, so we call about brand team. It means that those teams that really have very big amount of supporters. They are known not just in Brazil, not just in not just in the state when they are playing, but also they are very famous everywhere. And in Brazil, we have quite a good number of such teams. So, seminal papers that were discussing scholars that they were discussing in their seminal papers about uncertainty of outcome, you see that first papers appeared in 50s, 60s, in the last century. But now we can, a number of papers appeared, empirical papers, that actually have found contradictory results. So they have found that that there are cases when actually funds do increase their demand, even then when uncertainty of outcomes is very low. And we were trying to research this phenomenon. So Brazilian State Championship, as I said, why we focused on Brazilian Championship? Because it's a very unique laboratory when you could see that very big teams which are playing in the top leagues are playing with the non-league teams. So it means that they are just forced to do that. So it's not their decision because they are following the tradition of Brazilian State Championship. It's not federal level, but states. And they have to play, and that is put in their calendar, in their playing calendar, just because they have to do that if they belong to this city or town. And so we were trying to look for the balance between uncertainty of outcome. You can understand that this kind of matches, when very big team is playing against very low team, the uncertainty is very low. So we can predict with a very high probability that brand team is going to win. But at the same time, we understand that sometimes people just go to the match to see good play. So maybe even from one side, when the opponent is very weak. And sometimes even, so I'm not very familiar with all this football stuff. I'm just starting to attend matches. But what I can say, so now I have to do that. But what at least people who are really in this topic, they say that sometimes brand team, when they know that they're playing against weak opponent, they even introduce better game, because they have more room to take risk, to try to show everything that they can. So, but the main issue here, risk. And some people know that, especially those people that are experienced in participating in matches, and they prefer this kind of matches. So the main specifications that we estimate, you see that here is uncertainty and uncertainty squared, which is discussed in the recent literature. So we also test this hypothesis. But what for us is more important is to compare this uncertainty of outcome with the brand team participation, with some subsample which is related to brand team. So first, the distribution of attendance. You see that it's very special, because state championship, as I said, is not beneficial actually for the state. In general, has very low attendance. So sometimes majority of matches, they have attendance about 32, of course, is an outlier, so it is not close, this match. But what we can see that the number of people on the stand is more or less like a number of people on the pitch. So here is really very low number. But majority of them, they have less than 2,000 people on the stand. So it's very low for these big stadiums. And there were no sold outs, of course, during this period. What our guess was that having very big heterogeneity in teams that are playing with the opponents, so we guess that they should have very different clusters of types of matches. For that, we have taken logarithm, and we have seen that there is like a peak here, so it's very low attendance. Here is very high attendance, and so something in the middle. So at least 2 modes, maybe more. So the steps of our analysis: first, we have to identify brand teams, and for that we have used 2 criteria. First is that brand team has at least 20 state championship title, which is quite a big number. Also, they should have at least 1 Brazilian league title. And then we have checked all the teams that were in these clusters with the amount of funds, and we have, with the number of funds, and we have seen that all of them have more than 3.5 million funds. So all the rest have significantly less than 1 million. So identification of uncertainty of outcomes, and here we have introduced very specific metric which can be used just for this kind of championship, because usually it is estimated by the betting odds. Here we have used the relative measure of leagues. So it means that if teams are playing from this, so belong to the same league, the uncertainty of outcome is higher. If there are more difference in leagues, there are more uncertainty. And we, as I said, we have compared two different conditions. When team is playing against brand team, being weak opponent or brand team, or they are playing with normal team. So we have data from 3 main regions of Brasilia. It is Minas Gerais, São Paulo, and Rio de Janeiro. So actually majority of brand team that we can see on the international market came from this regions. So, and our metrics, it is match attendance, ticket price. We have a set of control variables. It is related to the match, and also some measure related to the team is level of the division to measure like the proxy of the quality, but also to measure the uncertainty, and titles in order to understand if this team is brand or not. Our preliminary results. So here you see that we have introduced the moderation. So we have first introduced the uncertainty, U-shaped uncertainty, and then we have moderated that with the brand team playing home or away. And what we can see that what is important and what is good actually outcome for this kind of studies, because a lot of studies they have found positive correlation with the price, so we don't see it, but it doesn't mean that it's not endogenous. Of course we understand that it's endogenous, and I will show how we try to fight with that. So uncertainty, we have confirmed general understanding that uncertainty has not just linear positive correlation, but there is a certain threshold after uncertainty is really important. And here we have seen that actually in our data, if it comes to brand team playing and with which is associated with a higher attendance on the stadium, so all the, I think that here is not really, on this scale is not so obvious, but I can say that we have all the observation with the brand team on this part of parabola. So that was important for us, because then we have used this part to explain the moderation effect. So here we see that when brand team is playing, what we could expect that if it comes to brand team playing in the match, the uncertainty has to play not so much significant role. So it means that they can expect lower uncertainty, but at the same time they would like to participate in the match. Actually, we didn't find that in our case. So we see that still supporters would like to observe both. So they would like, of course, to see matches with two strong teams. And sometimes when the difference in the division is not very significant, so we can say that brand team, of course, is a strong opponent, but it can be beaten by not brand team, but from the first or second league. So what we have done on the, so the only evidence you see here is when the brand team is playing away. In this case, even so the uncertainty plays again the role, but the people would prefer to see the match which they expect with high probability the outcome, but still they would like to go to see brand team if it's playing not in their city. So what we were trying to do in the second stage, we have separated this data set. Because for us it was important to see, because really we have seen that they are absolutely different. The attendance is so much significantly different that it's better to see them separately. And what we have found, so here, that is, let's say, normal matches of state championship where there is without brand teams, and you see that here price has expected coefficient, so it means that for normal matches we can have like normal demand respond. So if the price is higher, people can introduce less demand. If the price is lower, the demand is better. So we have here what is again confirmed U-shaped behavior of uncertainty, but if you look at the subsample with the brand team, here we have some problems. So we understand here that price is significantly positive, so it means that it's very much endogenous, and the price of tickets, average price is 2 times higher. So we have decided to find the instrument for the price, which is quite a difficult task. What have we suggested for that? So our idea is, so if we exclude matches that with more demanded matches, which is playoff, and we will look just on the group play, we can see that the price there might be related to the previous attendance of the same match in the previous seasons. So it means that organizers of the match, they try to set the price according to the expected attendance. And the best way to do that is to look to the previous attendance. If you control for the quality of the match, in this case we can say that each particular fan is not considering less attendance as the driver to go to this match. So they just want to see this particular match. So in this case, that might be a good instrument for our analysis. So we have instrument that, so you see the amount of matches here is significantly different because we have skipped all the matches related to playoff. So, and we have found that price is not anymore significant. So it means that, of course, controlling for all other factors. But what is interesting that if you control for all other factors, the relative share of uncertainty when it comes to, when we see the matches with the brand team playing is negative, what we expected. So it means that for attendance of matches with the brand team, uncertainty doesn't play so much role when we, comparing to the matches with, let's say, normal teams. So our results, price for tickets is on average not important, just when we talk about very normal matches, when there is no strong opponents, U-shape effect, and that is in line with the previous theoretical and empirical studies. We have revealed phenomena of highly competitive matches and brand team playing against small team, and we have found that for brand teams, on average, uncertainty, with the brand team participation, uncertainty is not so that much important compared to the matches with the non-brand team. So that's.
Thank you, Elena, for this presentation. I don't remember the name of the author, but there is a paper in which they estimate the favoritism by the referee having a look to soccer competition in different town where the team is when it's playing the local one.
Yes, no, it's a number of cards, yellow and red, received by.
No. It's just they take how long is the time, the extra time after the normal time when. Which is the referee's decision when is playing the local team. My question with respect to your analysis, do you have any way to control for the referee, how the referee affect the result, if he affects the result of this kind of competition?
No, we have this information in the data set, but in our case when we actually didn't analyze match scores. So for us, what was important is an attendance. So we have that data set. Maybe it's room for future studies. But yes, but here we just look at the, so let's say, pre-match analysis. So we didn't look at what was.
Maybe it would be.
So this is a very interesting and I think correct paper. It does suggest, it is consistent with the literature. Basically, the way I've read the literature is they sometimes refer to it as basically favoritism or brand name teams versus competitiveness. And basically what you're really identifying is there's two markets here. There's the markets for the games to be exciting or interesting versus the markets for a team. And the second one is more important. But I think you can probably get something more out of this paper by looking at the price of the tickets. So there's a lot of work by Levitt et al. That Steve Levitt has done work showing that a lot of companies do not maximize their revenue. So if the price doesn't seem to be important, another way of saying that is they are pricing it in the part of the demand curve at which they could raise the price of tickets for brand name games and dramatically increase their net revenue, even if it slightly lowers attendance. So the real question you could ask yourself, you could ask two questions. One is, if you could calculate how much money is left on the table by the league in not raising the prices of the brand name tickets. That's one. That would be very interesting. Secondly, you could ask whether it's rational, and there's two ways to do it. One story is it's rational if they're maximizing attendance, not revenue, for whatever reasons. And the other one has to do with there is this question about, are there prices which it goes so high that the attendance falls and then the value of the brand also falls. So I think if you work on this, you will have a very interesting follow-up, which is very good for the.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I have just one question. Can you control for the fact that sometimes brand teams playing with very low league teams, I mean, if the gap is too high and the match is not as important, usually use like second or even third, I mean, they don't let the stars to play, but sometimes people want to attend match also because they want to see like Ronaldo or somebody else. And can you control for that fact?
Yes, of course. So that is the issue, because when we look, so the lowest probability and measured by this actually dispersion between leagues, together with introducing this variable for brand team, is exactly this phenomenon. So,
thank you for your presentation. I've got some questions. First, did you include as a variable matches from teams from one city, like derbies? Because this
yes, there is control for derby.
Okay, you control. Then sometimes football can be like a social issue. There might be regions with very poor economic conditions, but it's like the only like important event in the region is just a football match. And this is why, and sometimes it depends on whether the football team is financed by the business or it is financed by local or regional authorities. And sometimes they can make prices lower just to let people attend this game for social reasons.
No, I would say that for this championship there is no subsidies.
All teams are private.
So no, some of them I guess are not private, but the price for tickets are not subsidized. I know that it is probably the case of the federal level, where the prices are really high. Here, prices are low, not because they are subsidized. So I'm not an expert, it's just so my co-author. So yes, we have considered this issue that
So, but maybe you could control if the team is privately financed or the team is financed by the.
I will ask. Actually, that actually I don't
because
have
in
an
Russia
answer for
it's
this.
a real issue.
Yes.
If it's controlled by regional authorities, prices can be lower. And also about brand team. Brand has some kind of lag, because there might be teams which, like in Russia, Spartak is a very huge brand, but it didn't win championship for 16 years. And it has a large number of fans, but it can perform very bad for 16 years. And so sometimes brand is not connected with the good results. And
Maybe not on Brazilian.
it's a lag variable. So maybe this can be taken into consideration. And the last question, why did you choose Brazilian championship? Maybe I didn't catch this.
Yes, sorry, that is a very important question. So we have chosen Brazilian State Championship because it's a very good example when so that it's mandatory to play for really strong teams with teams from very low divisions or even non-relegated, non-league team. So I know that it also there were like two examples, as far as I understand, is Russian. Also, I think that in Russia we used to have similar championship, and it was similar championship in UK. But as far as I know now, this it is just the only case.
Okay, thank you.
Since it's soccer and I play soccer myself, I'm very interested. So my first question would be, how does this price market works? In many countries I know, most fans pay for a year.
No, here are no season tickets for this kind of championship.
There's no season ticket?
For this, no.
Not at all. So they pay by match.
Yes.
So then I would like to see some stat of how much the prices differ by match. Do they set more or less the same price for every match, or does it differ by type of match? Does that differ by teams? Do some teams always set the same price, another differentiate? So that's a very important basic thing to know and to understand. And then if I think I'm not too sure how you measure uncertainty. But one of the things I know is that so the result seems to say that people like either top matches that are tight or slaughterhouse matches where you know it's going to be 12-0 and it's going to be great. A lot of goals, great soccer game, and Messi, Suarez, Neymar score like 7 or 8 goals, and it's great. They just destroy the team, and everybody's happy. And even the team that's destroyed is applauding for Messi, basically. This kind of matches, right? So it's logical they like these two matches. But then, how do you measure uncertainty? So, what I know is, at least in the European leagues, is that uncertainty is also dependent at the current situation in the table. So if I am playing a team that is currently just below me or just above me, we call this a 6-point match. Because I could be 1 point behind, but if they lose and I win, or the opposite, it makes a 6-point difference. It's a huge difference. So the uncertainty and the tightness depends at the table at that moment. So it's not. So what I'm basically trying to say is uncertainty and how tight the match is. It's not something that is fixed. It's time varying during the championship. So if at the very last, and also the last match of the season, they will determine, will I actually fall in a lower league? Will I win? So in the beginning it doesn't matter. You can lose some, you win some, but at the end, the importance is increasing massively. It's exponential. At the very end, the last match makes really 6 points difference. Will you make the playoff or not? This one last match will determine, and that's very huge. So it's really an information question. How do you take these things into account?
Yes, thank you very much. So starting from your second question, yes, now we are collecting the information about betting odds, and actually that will catch this dynamics and will more precisely estimate what we'd like to do. But for us, so at the moment that we have tried to do that, we didn't have this information, and actually the problem of these betting odds, that at the moment we didn't know the resource where to take for these very insignificant matches, now we have found, and we will do that for the robustness and for to catch this effect. But I think that is also very interesting measure. So it's discrete, it is not dynamic, but at the same time it's very clear for interpretation. I mean that at least there are a lot of criticism also about this betting odds, but here I would say that with lower variation, with lower interference of this maybe subjective perceptions, that clearly shows us that.
But how do you measure? I don't know.
So it is a relative difference between leagues. So it means, for example, if there is a match with the first league and fourth league, then it will be, so we just, the uncertainty of outcome will be 0.25. If it's from the same league, no matter is it first league or the last league, it will be 1. Yes, that is the idea, because this state championship is very unique case, because they have to play.
It's the cup. It's not the championship. We call it not the championship. It's a cup.
No, but here is called state championship.
Yes, it's very confusing because championships are within leagues, and if it's across leagues, everybody playing everybody everywhere in the world. They call it a cup. The cup final in Britain. So you have to be cautious with the jargon, because you will get the soccer guys. Maybe that's how they call it in Brazil, but most people will not understand this. But yes, now I understand what you're talking about.
Yes, but also when it comes to the cup, as I understood, it's not mandatory that you have to play there. And here is mandatory.
No. In Europe, you have to play. Everybody plays. So we have, like in Belgium and Britain, you have 4 classes, and they're all seeded against each other, and they all play each other. And it's always called the cup versus the championship.
Yes, because
so cup is playoffs, but championship it's regular. I mean.
Yeah. So it's really the cup thing. Okay. And so just it's not based on the ranking within the champions. It's just like in which league you are. That's it.
Yeah. So here it's called state championship, and really at the moment is the last.
Yeah, but you should clarify. It's really like a tournament, like a pyramid. This is so there's a whole literature on pyramid sports, like a tennis tournament, right? That's what it is. Everybody plays each other in couples, and then the winner goes through. So it's a pyramid. It's not a competition. It's a pyramid competition. It's very specific. So I think you have to clarify that's how it works. That's instinct to know, actually. Yeah.
So I'm also a big fan of football. That's why it's important topic for me. So the first question is how you measure uncertainty, only by comparing the leagues?
Yes.
But there might be some kind of bookmakers coefficients.
That's why I said betting odds, but we will do that soon. So we were planning to do that actually next week, because we have already data.
And maybe I think that I suggested for better understanding of what you are doing, maybe it's important to show some scheme of the tournament. Because it's really pretty natural
I understood that it's not very clear, so I tried to put emphasis that it's really
because
unique
it's
case,
really specific case of Brazil championship.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Then thank you. We are done.